She said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. "This is my sister. She's between jobs right now, you know how it is. Still trying to figure things out." She laughed when she said it. That little laugh she's had since we were teenagers. The one that sounds like a apology but isn't. Her hand was on my shoulder like she owned it. And I stood there in a navy blue dress that cost me nothing, holding a glass of sparkling water, smiling at a man I already knew far more about than he would ever be comfortable with. His name was Richard. He was my sister's boss. And he had no idea who I was. My sister's wedding reception was held at the Marriott in downtown Denver on a Saturday in October. The kind of October where the mountains outside look like a painting and the air inside a hotel ballroom still smells like fresh flowers and money. My sister had been planning it for 2 years. Every centerpiece, every menu item, every seating arrangement had been argued over, adjusted, color-coded in a shared Google Doc I was never invited to edit. I was invited to attend. That was the extent of my role. I had flown in from DC the night before. I didn't check a bag. I never check a bag anymore. Old habit. My mother had called me 3 times that morning. The first call was to tell me what time to arrive. The second was to remind me to dress nicely. The third was quieter. She asked, in that soft voice she uses when she's saying something she's already decided she's allowed to say, whether I had thought any more about looking into different career options, something more stable, something with benefits, something she could explain to people at parties. I told her I was doing fine. She said, "I know, honey. I just worry." She didn't know. That was the whole point. I'd been with the NSA for 6 years. I won't say which directorate. I won't say what my actual title is, because the title on my government ID and the title I use in polite conversation are 2 entirely different things, and the real one would mean nothing to most people, and far too much to a very specific few. What I will say is that I started as an analyst, that I was good at the work, and that 3 years ago I was moved into a position that required a level of clearance most people in the building spend their entire careers never reaching. My family knew I worked in tech. That was what I told them at Thanksgiving 6 years ago when I came home from training and my father asked what exactly I was doing in Maryland. "Tech," I said. "Government contractor stuff. Very boring." He nodded and went back to his turkey. My mother asked if the pay was decent. I said yes. My sister, who was 24 at the time and already climbing the corporate ladder at a financial firm in Denver, looked at me with that same expression. She's been perfecting her whole life, the one that says, "I love you and I don't take you seriously at all." She had never asked me a follow-up question about my job. Not once in 6 years. Which is how we ended up at her wedding reception, with her telling her boss that I was between jobs and still figuring things out. I took a sip of my sparkling water. Richard was in his late 50s, silver at the temples, the kind of tan you get from actual outdoor activity rather than a booth. He was the managing partner of an investment firm with offices in Denver, Chicago, and New York. He wore a watch that cost more than my first car. He shook my hand with the careful, measured grip of someone who has been taught that how you shake hands says everything about you. "Nice to meet you," he said. And then, with the particular brand of polite condescension that wealthy men of a certain age deploy like a reflex, "What field are you in?" "When you're working." "I mean," my sister laughed again. "She does something with computers," she said. "Data stuff. It's hard to explain." "It's fine," I said. I smiled at Richard. "I work in information security. Federal side." "Oh," he said. "Government work." The way he said it communicated clearly that he considered government work a consolation prize. A thing you did when the private sector didn't want you badly enough? Something like that, I said. My sister steered the conversation back toward herself, which she has always been very gifted at doing, and Richard laughed at something she said, and I stood there for another 4 minutes before excusing myself to find the bathroom. I didn't go to the bathroom. I found a quiet corner near the coat check, and I checked my phone. There were 2 messages. One was from my supervisor. One was from a number that, if I told you what it was attached to, would require me to have a much more serious conversation with you than this. I read them both. I responded to one. I put my phone in my clutch and stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool air near the lobby, before going back into the ballroom. What I knew about Richard that my sister did not. His firm had been flagged 14 months ago in connection with a financial routing pattern that overlapped indirectly, but not coincidentally with a foreign capital movement we had been tracking for most of the previous year. His name had appeared in two separate briefings I had either attended or prepared materials for. He was not a suspect. He was, in the language we use, a person of adjacent interest. Someone whose proximity to certain activities warranted attention without yet warranting action. I wasn't at this wedding to do anything about that. I was there because my sister had invited me, and I had said yes. Because I love my sister even when she makes me want to walk into the Rocky Mountains and not come back for a week. But knowing what I knew meant I sat a little differently in my chair at the family table. It meant I listened a little more carefully to the way Richard laughed. It meant I noticed things. The dinner service started at 7. I was seated at table 4 with my parents, my aunt, 2 cousins I hadn't seen in 3 years, and an older gentleman who turned out to be my brother-in-law's former college professor. He was delightful. We talked about Cormac McCarthy for 20 minutes, and I genuinely forgot where I was. Then my mother leaned over and said, in a voice calibrated to reach only me, "Your sister's been so wonderful with everything. She really has it together, doesn't she?" "She does," I said. "I just hope you find something like that. The stability, the clarity." She patted my hand. "You always seem so lost." I looked at my mother. She was not being cruel. I want to be careful about that, because cruelty would have been easier to dismiss. She was being sincere, which is so much harder to sit with. She genuinely believed that I was adrift. She had believed it since I graduated college without a traditional plan and disappeared into a training program I couldn't tell her anything about. And in the years since, every silence on my end had calcified in her mind into evidence of a life not fully lived. "I know," I said. "I'm working on it." She smiled and squeezed my hand and turned back to her salad. The speeches started at 8. My sister's maid of honor gave a beautiful one. My brother-in-law's best friend gave a funny one. My sister cried at both. She is very good at crying at the right moments, my sister. It's one of the things I genuinely admire about her. She understands occasion in a way that I've always been too practical to access. I did not give a speech. I had not been asked to. At 9:30, the band started, and the older guests began migrating to the edges of the room where the tables were quieter and the drinks were closer. I was standing near the bar with my cousin, who is 22 and wants to move to New York and become an actress. And she was telling me about an audition she had coming up. And I was genuinely interested because she's good and she's brave in the way that only young people who haven't been told no enough times can be. When my sister appeared, she had that look she gets. Bright-eyed and slightly glassy from champagne and the extraordinary effort of being the center of attention for 12 consecutive hours. "There you are," she said, as if I had been hiding. She grabbed my arm. "Come talk to Richard with me. His wife is lovely. You'd like her." I looked at my cousin, who made an encouraging face. I set down my drink and let my sister lead me across the dance floor. Richard was standing near the far end of the room with his wife and 2 other couples I didn't recognize. My sister made introductions with the confidence of someone who has never once questioned whether she belongs in a room. His wife was, in fact, lovely. Warm eyes, a quick laugh, the kind of woman who makes you feel heard inside of 30 seconds. "Your sister was just telling us about you," Richard said, when my sister stepped away briefly to greet someone. "Oh," I said. "Computers," he said, again with that tone. "Cybersecurity," I said. "But yes, tough field for job stability right now," he said. Not unkindly. Just automatically, the way rich people sometimes speak, delivering their assumptions about the world, the way weather systems deliver rain, without malice, without awareness that it lands on anyone. His wife was more careful. She tilted her head slightly. "What kind of cybersecurity work?" "Federal," I said. "Infrastructure protection, primarily, and some international coordination." Something shifted in her expression. She had a sharper instinct than her husband. "Which agency?" "I can't be very specific," I said. She nodded slowly. She understood what that meant. She didn't say anything else, but she looked at me differently after that. Richard laughed, a little uncertain. "All very cloak and dagger," he said. "Not usually," I said. "Mostly just a lot of meetings." My sister came back. She looped her arm through mine in that sisterly way she uses when she's also subtly positioning me. "Isn't she funny?" she said to the group. About me, as if I weren't standing right there. "She's always been so vague. Even as a kid, Mom used to say she had her own world. I like that, Richard's wife said. She was still looking at me. Some people need to keep their own world. The evening went on. At 10:15, my phone buzzed in my clutch. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway just outside the ballroom. The message was brief. A name. A confirmation number. A reminder that I had a briefing in Washington Monday morning at 7 a.m. and that a certain document I had been working on for the past 3 weeks had been approved at a level that made Monday's briefing more significant than any I had attended in the last 18 months. I stood in that hallway for a moment. The sound of the band came through the doors behind me, muffled and warm. I could hear my sister laughing from somewhere inside. That laugh I have heard my entire life. I wrote back a single confirmation. I put my phone away. When I came back into the ballroom, I almost walked directly into my father. He was heading toward the bar, and we collided softly near the entrance, and he grabbed my arm to steady us both. And then he looked at me in that way. He has tired eyes, gentle, and said, "You doing okay?" "I'm good," I said. "Great." He nodded. He patted my arm. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he said. He didn't say who he meant. He didn't have to. "I know," I said. "She just doesn't understand what you do." "Nobody does," I said. "That's sort of the point." He looked at me for a moment. I think something crossed his face, then some recognition, some recalibration of the picture he'd had of me for the past several years. He opened his mouth to say something, and then didn't, and then said, "Your mother and I are proud of you, even when we don't know what to be proud of exactly." It was the most he'd ever said about any of it. 6 years of silence from me, and 6 years of patience from him. And that was the sentence he chose, and I'll be honest, it was enough. "That means a lot," I said. He nodded and continued toward the bar. I went back to table 4. It was almost 11 when it happened. The event was winding down. The dance floor had thinned. My sister and her husband were making the rounds, saying goodbye to guests, posing for final photos. The overhead lights had come up slightly, the way they do in ballrooms when the night is technically still happening, but everyone has accepted that it's almost over. I was sitting with my coat across my lap, my clutch beside me, waiting for an appropriate moment to say my goodbyes. My aunt was telling a story about a cruise she'd been on. I was listening with genuine attention because she is a wonderful storyteller, and cruises are more complicated than people give them credit for. Richard appeared at the edge of the table. He wasn't looking for me specifically. I don't think he was. He was just making the rounds the way important guests do at these events, touching base, wrapping up. He stopped at our table because my father was there, and they shook hands and there were pleasantries. But then he looked at me. And something was different. His expression had changed. Not dramatically, subtly. The slight stiffness of a man who has spent the last 45 minutes doing something he doesn't normally do. His wife was standing a few feet behind him. She caught my eye, and I knew immediately. She had looked me up, or had him look me up, or had told him enough that he had done it himself. You can't Google what I do. Not really. There are layers between my name and my actual work that would take a sophisticated search and significant motivation to get through. And most people don't have either. But you can find enough. If you know what to look for. If someone has told you what questions to ask. Richard stood beside my chair. He said, "I wanted to say goodbye before we head out." "Of course," I said. I stood. He shook my hand again. But differently this time. 2 hands. Both of them. The way men who have been briefly humbled sometimes compensate. He held on a half-second longer than necessary. "I apologize," he said quietly, "if I was dismissive earlier." I didn't understand, he paused. Rearranged something internal. I didn't have the right context. "It's fine," I said. "Really?" "It's not," he said. And he seemed to mean it. "My wife." He glanced back at her. She gave him a look that was equal parts affection and expectation. "She's better at people than I am. Most people are," I said pleasantly. He laughed. Genuine this time. Surprised out of him. "Well." He let go of my hand. "If you're ever in Denver, I'll reach out," I said. He nodded. His wife gave me a small, knowing smile as they turned to go. I watched them cross the ballroom and disappear through the main doors. I sat back down. My aunt continued her story about the cruise. I picked up my water glass. I did not say anything to anyone at the table about what had just happened. There was nothing that needed saying. Across the room, my sister was hugging someone, laughing her laugh, luminous in her dress, her whole night laid out in photographs she'd spend the next month posting and organizing into albums. She was happy. Genuinely, fully happy. The way she deserves to be. She never found out. Not that night. Maybe not ever. And that was okay. I didn't need her to find out. I didn't need the moment witnessed or the satisfaction performed for an audience. The moment had been for Richard, not for me. And my not needing it for myself, that was the part I couldn't explain to my family and had stopped trying to. My mother found me near the coat check 20 minutes later. I was waiting for the attendant. She came up beside me and linked her arm through mine the way she did when I was small. And we stood there together, and she said, "You seemed far away tonight." "I'm right here," I said. "You're always right here and a million miles away at the same time," she said. I thought about that. It wasn't wrong. "I'm sorry I'm hard to read," I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder for a moment. "Just a moment. You're not hard to love," she said. "Just hard to keep up with." The attendant brought my coat. I put it on. Outside the lobby windows, Denver was lit up and cold, and the mountains were invisible in the dark, but I knew exactly where they were. I had a flight at 6:30 in the morning. I had a briefing at 7 a.m., Monday. I had 3 years of work about to walk into a room full of people who would decide what to do with it. I hugged my mother. I hugged my father. I found my sister in the middle of her goodbyes, and she grabbed me and held me for a long time, long enough that I held her back, long enough that it was real. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Me too," I said. "You never tell me anything," she said against my shoulder, half laughing, slightly complaining. Very her. "I know," I said. "Someday," she said. A request, not a demand. "Someday," I said. I don't know if that's true. Some things about my life I may never be able to share with her, not because I don't trust her, but because the structures around what I do don't allow for trust to be enough. And I've made peace with that. Not easily. Not all at once. But the way you make peace with most things that are permanent by deciding that what you have inside the silence is worth protecting, even from the people you love. I walked out of the Marriott at 11:47. The valet brought my rental car around, and I tipped him and sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. The city was quiet the way cities get when it's cold and late, and the people who stay out are the ones who have nowhere to go or the ones who are exactly where they want to be. I started the car. I thought about Richard's face when he shook my hand the second time. I thought about my father saying, "I'm proud of you," even when I don't know what to be proud of. I thought about my sister's laugh and my mother's arm through mine, and my cousin talking about her audition and the older professor who loved McCarthy. I thought about the briefing Monday morning, about the document, about what came next. I pulled out of the hotel lot and onto the street. My phone was in the cup holder, dark and silent. Somewhere on the other side of the country, a building with no windows I could point to on a map held rooms full of people doing what I do, at all hours, in all seasons, in the gap between what the world knows and what the world needs someone to quietly know for it. I merged onto the highway. Denver opened up on either side of me, lights and dark sky and cold October air pressing against the windows. I had a 6:30 flight. I was exactly where I was supposed to be.